I'm just thinking about coherence and incoherence. I can't remember what got me to think about that. But just in terms of these words as expressive of a certain kind of hanging together of information, I guess I'm just trying to understand why we would use a word like coherent. If there's anything in this idea to do with conceptual metaphor theory, that whole cognitive linguistics project that I seem to refer to quite a bit, then we must use words like coherence as metaphors or collections of image schema to structure our understanding of concepts which would otherwise be incoherent, structure our understanding of concepts which would otherwise be incomprehensible because they're too abstract. And given that we have bodies and brains of animals designed to deal with concrete experiences, we only understand abstract experiences through this application of metaphor. At least that's my understanding of those theories, at least. So to return to coherence, coherence is an abstract concept when applied to ideas themselves. You know, if someone tells me a piece of philosophy, or if I read a piece of science, or any way of coming across a set of ideas, if they make sense, then I might use the word coherent. If they don't make sense, I might use the word incoherent. So why am I using those words? Well, I guess the embodied source of those metaphors is to do with sticking together. My understanding is that's what coherent means, to stick together. And presumably that sticking together, when you take two objects and stick them together, there are certain entailments of that action, certain consequences follow from sticking things together, which are organized. There's a kind of organized set of parameters around those consequences, which perhaps form the logic for the use of coherence as a metaphor. So, for example, if I take two objects and stick them together, then effectively I can treat them as one object. I can hold them in one hand. They have a single boundary, if you like, if they're stuck together so that they're contiguous. They have a single boundary. They exist at the same place, the same time. What else about them? If I move one, then the other one moves at the same time. They have a shared fate in that regard. What else about things that really cohere, that really stick together? I can't think of anything else. But there's a set of ideas there to do with common fate, to do with boundaries, to do with contiguity, to do with occupying the same space at the same time, those kind of ideas. So presumably it's those kinds of entailments which would be carried over into the use of coherence as a conceptual metaphor. So when I say a set of ideas are coherent, or a philosophy is coherent, or an ethics is coherent, then presumably I'm applying the same kinds of entailments. So a philosophy which was coherent would have be able to hold it in one hand, metaphorically speaking. So it would be individually graspable, I suppose. I'm not really. Yeah, that's not quite right. There's something to do with its singularity and and the singularity of one's relationship with it. It would be bounded. We'd have a single boundary. So, and boundaries in those things tend to be things like definitions or criteria or lists of necessary and sufficient conditions. Those I would tend to define boundaries in conceptual terms. So presumably any philosophical piece of coherent ideation would similarly share a boundary of definition, share a set of necessary and sufficient conditions, share a set of criteria for membership of that category of whatever it may be, philosophical thought. So again, that would be part of that coherent, the entailment of the coherence metaphor. Occupying the same space and time, yeah, I think that probably fits into it somewhere. I think that's about as far as I can go with that right now. I think one of the interesting things, which I haven't resolved even closely yet, even come close to resolving, is to do with when we use the word incoherent. And this is probably just maybe just idiosyncratic on my part, but whenever I use the term incoherent, I always think of muffled sounds. You know, if someone is saying something incoherent, sometimes I use it to mean that I can't understand what they're saying because their ideas are all over the place, unbounded, showing disunity, all those things I've already talked about. But I often use the word incoherent also to mean kind of muffled, or mumbled, or kind of blurred. And I'm not really sure what's going on there with that. I'll have to have a think about that, to see if that occupies a completely different metaphorical territory, or whether it's just kind of further entailment.